The look on my son Julian's face when my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, adjusted his glasses and leaned over that mahogany desk. I wish I could frame it and hang it right above my fireplace. It was the exact moment the color drained from his cheeks, and his mouth hung open just enough for me to see the expensive dental work I'd paid for 3 years ago. 20 years of Julian and his sister Sarah taking me for granted. 20 years of them treating my hard-earned life's work like a communal ATM, and they never once considered that I might have a plan of my own. But to understand why they were both staring at me like I'd just grown a second head, I need to take you back to the beginning. I spent 38 years as a tool and die maker in a town that doesn't exist anymore, at least not the way it used to. I worked double shifts, I skipped vacations, and I wore the same pair of work boots until the soles were thinner than a Sunday newspaper. I did it all for my family. I put Julian through a top-tier business school and paid for Sarah's master's degree in fine arts. When my wife, Martha, passed away 5 years ago, I thought the three of us would grow closer. I thought the values we'd instilled in them, hard work, respect, and patience, would finally bear fruit. But instead of fruit, I got rot. It started small, a missed birthday here, a too busy to visit there. Then the phone calls started changing. They didn't call to ask how my hip was doing or if I wanted to grab lunch. They called because Julian's investment opportunity needed a $50,000 bridge loan, or because Sarah's husband, Mark, a man who thinks a suit makes him a genius, needed a down payment for a vacation home they couldn't afford. I'm a patient man. I'm methodical. I've spent 40 years building one of the most complete rare coin collections in the Pacific Northwest. It started with a 1909 SVDB Lincoln cent my grandfather gave me when I was 10. Over the decades, I hunted down Morgan dollars, gold eagles, and buffalo nickels. That collection wasn't just metal in a box to me. It was every Saturday morning I spent at trade shows, every hour of overtime I calculated against the price of a rare mint mark. It was my legacy. It was worth, by recent appraisal, roughly $480,000. And that was the problem. My children didn't see history when they looked at my collection. They saw a cruise through the Mediterranean and first-class tickets to Paris. The first real crack in the foundation happened last Thanksgiving. We were sitting in my dining room, the one I built the table for with my own 2 hands, and Julian's wife, Chloe, started talking about her vision board. She's the kind of person who uses the word manifest every 3 sentences. "Arthur," she said, swirling a glass of the expensive Cabernet I'd bought for the occasion, "Julian and I have been talking. We've had such a stressful year at the firm. We really need a reset, a grand tour of Europe. 3 months, 5-star villas, the works. And Sarah and Mark want to join us." I nodded slowly, cutting Ray turkey. "Sounds expensive, Chloe. Better start saving." The table went silent. Sarah cleared her throat, her voice taking on that manipulative, high-pitched tone she uses when she wants something. "Well, Dad, that's the thing. We were thinking about your coins. They're just sitting in that safe at the bank, collecting dust. You don't even look at them anymore. If you sold just the gold pieces, it would cover the whole trip for all of us. It would be a family bonding experience. Don't you want that for your children?" I put my fork down. I looked at Julian, expecting him to defend his father's lifelong hobby. Instead, he leaned in. "Come on, Dad. You're 72. What are you going to do? Take them to the grave? Chloe's right. It's just metal. We're your flesh and blood."
If that was all, I probably would have let it go with a firm no. But then came the following Tuesday. I went to the bank to check on my safety deposit box. When the manager, a man I've known for 20 years, saw me, he looked uncomfortable. He pulled me into his office and told me that Julian and Sarah had been there the day before. They had brought a notarized document claiming I was beginning to suffer from cognitive decline and that they needed access to the box to appraise assets for my protection. The document was a forgery, and a bad one at that. The bank turned them away, of course, but the betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They didn't see me as their father. They saw me as a locked vault, and they were trying to find the dynamite. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't call them. I didn't scream. I didn't even send a text. Instead, I made a call to my old friend and attorney, Elias Henderson. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I was a ghost. I attended the Sunday dinners they suddenly started hosting. I listened to Mark talk about how the European market was ripe for his expansion while he drank my scotch.
I watched Chloe show me pictures of villas in Tuscany that cost more per week than I made in a year in the 80s. I even let them believe I was considering the sale. "I'm thinking about it, kids," I'd say, watching their eyes light up with greed. "It's a big decision. Those coins are my life." "They're just things, Dad," Sarah would say, patting my hand with a fake affection that made my skin crawl. "Memories are what matter. Think of the memories we'll make in Rome." What they didn't know was that while they were dreaming of Rome, I was sitting in Elias's office, looking over the St. Gaudens Trust I'd established years ago. This was a private trust I'd set up shortly after Martha passed. It held the coins, my house, and my remaining liquid assets. And buried deep in the bylaws was a very specific clause, one I'd added after seeing how they'd treated their mother's jewelry when she was in the hospice. The wait was the hardest part. I had to play the part of the doting, slightly confused old man. I even let them take me to a pre-trip dinner at the most expensive steakhouse in the city. Julian ordered a $1,000 bottle of wine, assuming I'd be paying the bill with coin money soon. He actually toasted to new beginnings and family legacies. I toasted back, smiling. I knew that in 48 hours, their world was going to turn upside down. The reckoning took place on a rainy Friday morning. I'd invited them all to Elias's office, telling them we needed to sign the paperwork for the liquidation of the collection. They arrived in high spirits. Julian was wearing a new watch he'd clearly bought on credit, expecting a windfall. Sarah was carrying a brochure for a luxury luggage set. We sat in the conference room. The air was thick with their excitement. "All right, Elias," Julian said, leaning back. "Let's get this over with. We've got a lot of planning to do. Dad's agreed to sell the 1933 Eagle and the St. Gaudens set first, right?" Elias didn't look up. He opened a thick Onilla folder and slid a document across the table. "Actually, Julian, we're here to discuss the status of the St. Gaudens private trust. Your father has reached a decision regarding the assets." "Yeah, the decision to sell," Sarah chirped. "We talked about it at dinner." "Not exactly," I said quietly. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a calm I hadn't felt in years. "I've decided to move the entire collection, but not to a buyer." Sarah's smile flickered. "What do you mean? Then where is the money coming from?" Elias cleared his throat. "The collection has been officially donated to the American Numismatic Association's permanent museum. The transfer was completed yesterday. It is no longer your father's property to sell, and it certainly isn't yours."
The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a thunderstorm breaks. "You did what?" Julian's voice was a low growl. "You gave it away? That's $500,000, Dad. That's our inheritance. You're not in your right mind. We talked about this. You're being selfish." "Selfish?" I asked, my voice remaining steady. "I worked 38 years for that selfishness. I paid for your cars, your homes, your weddings, and your mistakes. And how did you repay me? By trying to forge my signature at the bank? By treating me like a corpse you're waiting to pick clean?" Mark, the son-in-law, stood up, his face red. "Now wait a minute, Arthur. We have rights. We're family. You can't just dump our future into a museum." "Actually," Elias interrupted, his voice like ice, "he can. And there's more. Julian, Sarah, did you read the clause about the private trust? Specifically, Section 12, Paragraph C, the one regarding attempted coercion and bad faith?" Julian snatched the paper. As he read, I watched his face go from red to a sickly pale white. "The clause states," Elias continued for the benefit of the room, "that any beneficiary who attempts to use legal or illegal means to force the liquidation of trust assets for non-essential luxuries, such as, say, a 3-month luxury Euro trip, forfeits their status as a beneficiary, permanently." "You're cutting us off?" Sarah shrieked, tears of rage welling up. "Over a trip? Over some stupid coins?" "It was never about the coins, Sarah," I said, standing up. I felt 10 feet tall. "It was about the fact that you stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as a hurdle. You were so busy looking at my safe that you forgot to look at me. You wanted to use my life's work to fund a vacation you didn't earn. Well, now you have all the time in the world to earn it yourselves." Julian started to scream. He called me a senile old fool. He told me I'd die alone in a nursing home. He even tried to lunge across the table to grab the documents, but Elias's security was already at the door.
I didn't flinch. I just watched them. I watched the greed turn into desperation and then into a pathetic, whimpering realization. The house is still in the trust, I said, pausing at the door, but the locks are being changed this afternoon. I've decided to sell it and move into a smaller place by the coast. The proceeds are going to a scholarship fund for trade school students, kids who actually know the value of a day's work. You can't do this to us, Chloe wailed. We have bills, we have a lifestyle. Then I suggest you get a second job, I said. I hear the local plant is hiring. The shifts are long, but the work is honest. I walked out of that office and didn't look back. I could hear them arguing with each other in the hallway, Sarah blaming Julian, Mark blaming Sarah. The family bond they were so worried about dissolved the second the money was off the table. That was 6 months ago. My life is much quieter now. I live in a small cottage overlooking the ocean. I still have a few coins, the ones that weren't in the trust. My grandfather's 1909 SVDB sits on my mantle. It's not worth much compared to the others, but it reminds me of who I am and where I came from. Julian and Sarah call me every Sunday now. It's funny how that works. Their voices are much softer, much more concerned about my health. They ask if I need anything. They tell me how much they miss our family time. They're trying to get back into the will, of course. They think if they're nice enough for long enough, I'll change my mind.
But they don't realize that I'm a methodical man. I've already made my final move. The trust is ironclad, and my peace of mind is even stronger. I spent 40 years collecting rare things, but I finally realized that the rarest thing of all is a life lived with dignity, free from people who only love you for what you can give them. I'm planning a trip to Europe myself next spring. I'm going alone. I'm flying coach, and I'm going to spend my time in the small, quiet museums looking at history. I don't need a 5-star villa to feel like a king. I just needed to remember that I'm the one who holds the keys.